Okay, we'll start the recording now. We'll start. Um, so we'll be finishing up our book of Daniel tonight. So if you'll turn to the first chapter, we're going to kind of go through the book in a very high level, um, but I want to hit some things. I'm going to leave out a lot of details, but I want to hit some things that I think are going to be very important as we go back into our study in Revelation after this. Now, next week, next week is going to be Thanksgiving. So we always take Thanksgiving off. You should be with your families there. So next week we'll be taking the week off for Thanksgiving. I'll still send a reminder out, but I'm going to put, Thanksgiving holidays, happy holiday to everybody on it, so that I'll keep that email circulating. And then I'm going to have to beg your forgiveness, but my sister is retiring. She's my younger sister. She's a couple of years younger than I am, but she's retiring from her. She's an attorney with the Department of Justice in Mobile with drug enforcement. She puts
Wow.
drug guys in jail. Lots of drug guys in jail down there. She is finally retiring at the end of the year, and they're having a retirement party for her, not this coming Thursday, but next Thursday. So I'm going to fly down there to see my sister. I haven't seen her in several years, and I'm gonna spend a few days down there. My brother is down there too. My younger brother is. They're both down there in Mobile, so I'm gonna go down there. So we're actually gonna take 2 weeks off. I'm gonna send
Wow.
another. I'm gonna send another invite out just to keep the email going. But if you will beg me a pardon, I'm gonna take another week off and just go down and see my brother and sister for a few days down there. Uh, um, so we will start though in that will be the second week of December. We'll start back on our study of Revelation. So yeah, if you can give me that extra week off, I would be appreciative of that. So just mark your calendars. We'll be off for 2 weeks. First time we've ever taken 2 weeks off.
I
So
know.
yeah. So let's take 2 weeks off. Start reading in Revelation. Start. I'll put the references to Tom's study on Revelation also in the email, so that you can start listening to that if you're listening to Tom also. So just
Well,
some.
I hope you have safe travels.
Oh, thank you. Hopefully the airplane will the airplane will have safe travels, because I'm gonna fly down there. I'm getting too old to drive that far. I used to drive there all the time, but no, not anymore. Um,
Hopefully, you'll be able to get back and the flights won't be delayed.
well, hopefully, but uh, from I'm actually flying to Pensacola, so that's a pretty active hub there. They've got the air base there. The Blue Angels are there, based in Pensacola, and we might jump over there to see if they're flying that weekend. So
Wow.
it's going to be a nice trip. I haven't been down home in a long time, so it'll be entertaining. Um, all right, one other point. Um, BJ, I looked at my timeline. If you remember, we were studying Genesis, and we were talking about the coming flood, and we were talking about the lifespan of the patriarchs. And if you look, you can find these lifelines all over the internet. And I keep a couple of them in my notebook here. I didn't have them last night, which I should have, because I hadn't looked at this thing forever, BJ. But I was looking at it, and Lamech, Noah's father, did not actually live to the flood. He died just before the flood. And This is another thing. Don't tell me there is no grace in the Old Testament. You guys look around, see if you can. There's all sorts of them on the internet. Just find a lifeline of the patriarch's life. And as I'm looking at this, I had not noticed this before, BJ, but somebody was reminding me and you. Methuselah, remember, when Methuselah died, that was the signal for the flood to begin. Lamech, Methuselah's son and Noah's father, died ish about 50 years before the flood, looks like. No, about 5 years before the flood, Lamech died. So Methuselah died and the flood started, but 5 years before that, Lamech died. And if you look, Methuselah's father was Enoch. And remember, Enoch didn't die, Enoch was taken.
Yeah.
So you have a gap there between Enoch, Methuselah, and Lamech, where those three fathers in the line of Jesus died or were taken before the flood. We were talking about Lamech had to be unrighteous because the flood took him. And I didn't remember. I didn't remember, but he died just before the flood. God's grace is all through the Old Testament. All through the Old Testament. So if you can look around, find you a, like I said, I keep a couple of these charts in my notebook just for reference because I can't remember that stuff anymore. But there's some amazing things when you look through the lives of the patriarchs. Like if you look down here, when Abraham was growing up, there is a chance, there is a chance that Abraham may have met not only Shem, Noah's son, but Noah himself, because they were living at the same time. Noah and Shem were alive when Abraham was in his early adulthood. That's pretty significant. That's pretty significant. And we forget that kind of thing when we don't understand how long the early fathers lived and how quickly their lifespan fell off after the flood. Something significant. And I'm sure we'll talk about this in the Genesis class. So if you're interested in that, drop in on that. We'll be hitting the flood here pretty soon, like week after next, I think. So if you're interested in that class, I think I have a link to it in the email. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that back up, BJ, and correct myself. No, Lamech did not die during the flood. Lamech died just before by the grace of God. So, all right. So, first chapter of Daniel. Any questions before we get started? Any questions that you've had since last week or about anything, remember? If I can bring up the patriarchs, you guys can bring up anything you want during the class because it's we're here to answer questions first, then we get to the lesson. So any questions we got before there? Oh, let me count people too. Okay. So any questions? All right. So let's start with Daniel. Book of Daniel. Everybody in this class better know that if you're looking at any kind of Bible that has any kind of introduction to Daniel, and you see that Daniel was written in 100 or 200 BC, It's time to not take what anything written in the footnotes or in the side notes of that Bible, just take them with a grain of salt. And that goes for anything they write, because that means that they don't believe that Daniel saw the future. They don't believe in heavenly messengers. They don't believe in the supernatural. You've got to look at what they are writing in their study Bibles or in the footnotes. You've got to be suspicious of that, because they do not believe in angels, heavenly beings, or prophecy that can see into the future. We know that Daniel was written by Daniel when he was in Babylon, and that was around 600 or so BC. So we know that absolutely. Daniel is a good mark to find out whether the person that's writing whatever you're reading is a real believer in the heavens and the earth, angels, God himself. So use Daniel for that. It was written around 600 BC. Daniel, oddly enough, is the only Old Testament book that we've got something written outside of Hebrew in. Remember, Daniel was written partially in Aramaic, which is the language of the Gentiles, and partially in Hebrews. The first chapter was written in Hebrew, and then the next 5 chapters, 2 through 7, were written in Aramaic, Gentile language, and then the end part of Daniel was written in Hebrew again. So you got to understand that when you're reading in those middle chapters of Daniel, that is in the language of the Gentiles, and you have to kind of shift your mind a little bit to think that this was written with a Gentile understanding. And when you get to Hebrew, first chapter and then the last chapters, that's written with a Hebrew mindset. So only book that we've got is written in 2 languages. Um, the first the first chapter of Daniel, and I'm just going to flip through the book as I'm looking at my outline here. First chapter of Daniel, remember, is basically a history. It's the coming of Nebuchadnezzar, the conquering of Jerusalem and Israel, and the carting off of parts of the Jews off to Babylon. Daniel and his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Persian. Um, Daniel and his 3 friends were part of this group that was taken off, but Daniel, just like Joseph, when we get to him, Daniel took his captivity, and through the fact that he was an absolute follower of God, he was recognized by his captors as being something special. He and his 3 friends. And remember, Daniel gets promoted real quick, and that also makes some problems for him, just like it did for Joseph. So the first chapter is basically history. In the second chapter, we switch over to Aramaic, and we go to look at Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. And one of the things we find very quickly, and it's something that I had not realized either in my rather poor study when I was younger, but Nebuchadnezzar, remember, goes down and conquers uh, the the Hebrews, but we get in when we look at Jeremiah especially, we find out something, like I said, that I didn't know, that Nebuchadnezzar was not just an instrument of God's punishment of Israel like Egypt. Egypt was an instrument of God to punish the the Jews. Nebuchadnezzar was the same, but Nebuchadnezzar was very different. So when we read in Jeremiah 21, the 21st chapter, the first part of that chapter, and I'm going to drop down to the 7th verse. Afterwards declares God declares the Lord, I will give Zedekiah, this is the last king of Judah, Zedekiah, I will give Zedekiah, king of Judah, and his servants, and the people in the city who survived the pestilence, sword, and famine, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and into the land of their enemies, and into the land of those who seek their lives. They shall strike them down with the edge of the sword. He shall not have pity on them, nor have compassion. And when we read again um, in Jeremiah 27, we find out that not only, now, God said the same thing about the Egyptians. He's going to send the Egyptians and the Assyrians. He sent the Assyrians to punish them. But Nebuchadnezzar was different. In the 27th chapter, that whole chapter of Nebuchadnezzar, I'm going to start reading at the 6th verse. Now I have given these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant. That is huge right there. That is huge. God never called Pharaoh his servant, but God called Nebuchadnezzar his servant. And I have given him also the beasts of the field to serve him. All the nations shall serve him and his son and his grandson until the time of his own land comes. Then many nations and many kings shall make him their slave. But if any nation or kingdom will not serve Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and put his neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, I will punish that nation with the sword, with famine, with pestilence, declares the Lord, until I have consumed it by his hand. Nebuchadnezzar was God's servant. That is huge. I had never known that. I just assumed he was another instrument of God. But that was a huge revelation to me here. And it's something important when we read. In chapter 2, now we look at Nebuchadnezzar and he has a dream. He has a dream. And we remember the dream because Nebuchadnezzar apparently knew his wise men well, because like a lot of dreams that we see in the Old Testament, the king or the pharaoh will tell the wise men or tell somebody his dream, and then we'll have Joseph or other prophets interpret the dream as the king or the pharaoh tells it to them. But this one was different. Nebuchadnezzar he didn't trust these wise men at all. He wouldn't tell them the dream. He said, you should be able to tell me the dream and then interpret it. And of course, that didn't work out well for him, so Nebuchadnezzar got mad, threatened to kill him, and it wasn't until Daniel came up to interpret his dream. And Daniel, without knowing, the king did not tell him the dream. Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar the dream, then interprets it. And this is a hugely important dream here. We're going to see this. This is foreshadowing of Revelation. Remember what the dream was. The dream was a giant statue, a very awe-inspiring, terrible, massive statue of, I guess, a man. It kind of indicates that. It's got a head, shoulders. So it's a huge statue of a man, but it's not just a huge rock statue. It's actually a statue that's made up of different metals. And remember, the head is gold, the chest and arms are silver, the belly and the thighs are bronze, and then the legs are iron, and then he adds the iron at the feet become mixed with clay. And that's the weird part. So we have this statue that's gold and silver and bronze and iron, and then something brittle at the bottom at his feet. And Daniel goes ahead and interprets the dream as these are the four kingdoms, Gentile kingdoms to come. Babylon being the head of gold, because God said, Nebuchadnezzar is my servant. So the most shining, bright kingdom, Nebuchadnezzar's. Then we go to the next one, being the Media-Persian Empire, made of silver. And the Media-Persian Empire, because I've said Media and Persia was a divided, you don't want to say divided because they worked together, but it was a kingdom made of two powers, just like the two arms. So we see the two arms kind of represent the Medes and the Persians. Then we get down to the Greek Empire, the next one, made of bronze. And then finally we get down to this last kingdom, which it doesn't say Rome, but we all know, and eventually we get to that this is Rome as the Iron Kingdom. And then that iron with feet of clay, we never really get an explanation of that, other than, remember at the end of the dream there is a giant stone that is from this mountain of God, and the giant stone comes crashing down and hits the statue in those feet, and the statue is completely turned to dust. And of course, this to us, being on this side of the prophecy, we understand that that is a shadow of the coming Messiah that is going to put an end to the Gentile empires. Now, I'm going to say that is my supposition, that Nebuchadnezzar's statue illustrates the ruling Gentile empires from Nebuchadnezzar's time to the end of days. That is the end. That's my supposition. Now I try and make it clear when I say these things. I don't always remember, but this is what I believe. It's a common belief, but it's not widespread. It's not universal. There's a lot of people think that it stopped back when Jesus died and was resurrected. I'm still of a mind to continue that statue on until the end of days. So, there are at least two interpretations, and probably some more that I don't even know about. But a lot of folks think that the statue ends when Jesus died and was resurrected. So perfectly valuable. I'm not going to argue with it. I just think that those feet of clay, of iron and clay, really have me. I'm still thinking about that. I'm still
Hey,
thinking about that.
this is Kim. Hey.
Yeah. We
Uh,
didn't wake you up, did we?
no,
Okay.
no, I wanted to get up so I can join. But something I was thinking, there was that statue, that golden statue that those people were made to, to work, bow down and worship. But
Right.
at some point in the future, there's going to be another image. It's going to be the image of the beast that people are going to have to fall down and worship, basically.
Yep.
And it just kind of, that's what I was thinking of when I was, hearing you talk about all of this.
Yeah. That's why I want to go over this because we're going to see all this again in Revelation, and we have to we're going to have you're going to have a bookmark in Daniel as we're going through Revelation, because we're going to be jumping back into there, and also into Ezekiel, and also into Jeremiah, and also into Isaiah, and a few others too, because without the Old Testament, Revelation is a cloud. But when you look back on, especially Daniel, that's why we did it, especially Daniel, it makes Revelation a lot clearer, because, Kim, exactly what you said, that golden statue, where did that come from? Well, guess what happens in chapter 3, that we're right here, after Daniel interprets Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Nebuchadnezzar builds himself a golden statue. A golden statue. Doesn't say what it's of. Probably, from best he could remember that dream, he probably made him a golden statue that looked sort of like that dream. Whatever it was some man, and it probably represented not Nebuchadnezzar, but the kingdom of Babylon. Now, once again, that's what I'm thinking. It's six of one, half a dozen of the others. A lot of people think it was Nebuchadnezzar. But in chapter 3 now, go
It
ahead.
could have had his face on the statue, though.
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah, we don't know. We don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly, so we have to kind of suppose. And with all this prophecy, a lot of it, especially the stuff that we've got coming, we have to be humble. We have to be humble in trying to interpret prophecy in the future. Because you saw what happened to Daniel as he was getting these, and Daniel was getting them from the source. Daniel was getting them he was getting them from Nebuchadnezzar, and then he has to go to God to get the interpretation. And then the angel, the heavenly messengers are coming down and telling Daniel these things. So you see what it did to him. He was sick as a dog after these things. So we have to be humble when we're trying to interpret prophecy that hasn't happened yet. We think, oh, we got this. This is easy right here. Yeah, because we look back in history and we see Daniel was exactly right the whole time. But the stuff that we've got coming, we need to be as humble as Daniel was and take it as seriously as he did, to try and look at it with God's help. So, we now have after Nebuchadnezzar's statue with the four metals. Now Nebuchadnezzar builds him a golden statue because of this dream, because he sees that Babylon is this golden head that's on top of everything. Nebuchadnezzar kind of gets a little full of himself and builds him a giant golden image that he wants people to bow down and worship. And that worked for most everybody except for the four Jews. And you say, well, wait a minute, there was only 3 that were put in the fiery furnace. Remember, we're thinking that Daniel was a very high ranked person, probably like number 2, number 3 in the kingdom now. Daniel had a lot of duties that were out in the kingdom. So most people are thinking that Daniel was absent when this statue was erected and all the edicts went out that everybody was to worship. And the Chaldeans, remember, when we got in Babylon here, we've got 2 classes of people. We've got the Babylonians, which are the the common folks, and they speak Aramaic. And then we've got this group of intellectuals. You can say it's the university folks. They're the Chaldeans, and they speak um, Akkadian. I almost forgot it. They speak Akkadian, which is a higher class of language. So these university guys are not too thrilled with Daniel getting promoted right up in amongst them, because not only was he not a Persian, he was a Jew. He was a captive. So they weren't real thrilled with Daniel and his buddies' positions that they were given. So they weren't real friends of him. And when this edict came out, these Chaldeans knew that we can create some mischief here. So they kind of tricked Nebuchadnezzar into condemning anybody who wouldn't worship this statue. Them knowing that the only three that were going to do it were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He knows that they're not going to do it. They knew that they're not going to do it. So they were supposed to be put into the fiery furnace. They heated it up. They threw them in there, and nothing happened. So God not only confounded the Chaldeans, but he showed himself again to Nebuchadnezzar. And we remember that Nebuchadnezzar praised God highly in chapter 4 after this incident. He praised God highly to the point where a lot of people are on the fence about Nebuchadnezzar might have really called on the name of the Lord and was was saved. Was saved. I don't think so, but a lot of people do. And you, when you read some of the hymns that Nebuchadnezzar says in here, you think it could be. It could be. I don't think so, but there's just as many people that say yes, he was. So um, that's up to us to suppose. After the fiery furnace, Nebuchadnezzar has a second dream. And in this dream, he dreams about a giant tree. This is in chapter 4. He dreams about this giant tree. Magnificent tree. Giant trees are in the Middle East. They're very emblematic of a kingdom and a king. So this is no surprise to him. He sees this giant tree. He immediately thinks, this is me, my kingdom. And the tree gets cut down. So that didn't work out for him. He's a little bit troubled by this. So he goes to Daniel, and Daniel interprets the dream. And we get the interpretation of a period of exile for Nebuchadnezzar. And the tree is cut down. It's a period of exile for him where he goes out of favor with God. Nebuchadnezzar hears it, doesn't repent, continues his ways, and eventually, of course, Nebuchadnezzar loses his mind for this indeterminate period of time. Loses his mind, hairs grow long, fingernails are like bird's claws. Eventually, God restores him, just like in the dream. The kingdom.
It was 7 years, I believe.
That's the general. Idea that it was 7. There's a little ambiguity there, but yeah, it's probably 7 years. A little bit of ambiguity between the way the Hebrew is written. So that's the majority opinion. It was 7 years. Um, so, but like I say, just bear in mind, there's a little bit of argument because the Hebrew doesn't say 7 years. It's a little ambiguous there, but generally you think that's probably what they're talking about. Nebuchadnezzar is restored, and at that point he writes this hymn. And remember, this part of Hebrews, this part of Daniel is. Here's another oddity. This part of the Old Testament is written by a Gentile. Chapter 4, starting in verse 4, says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house. This part of the Old Testament was written by a Gentile. It didn't happen before. So Daniel is full of all sorts of stories. So this is actually a story from Nebuchadnezzar's own words. He tells his own story. So finally we come to the end of Nebuchadnezzar, and we switch over now to the Media-Persian Empire. Oh no, I'm sorry. We still got some Persians to go. Sorry, I jumped the gun. Belshazzar was a relative of Nebuchadnezzar. Not real clear exactly who it is, but where it is, but it's probably the 3 generations away from Nebuchadnezzar that God predicted that Nebuchadnezzar would be in power. Remember, it says you, your son, and your grandson. So the genealogy, of course, we're talking about ancient history here. Ancient history is not nearly as well documented as the Bible is. So we don't really know a whole lot, but it does look like this Belshazzar was a relative of Nebuchadnezzar, and probably about 3 generations away. So it looks good as far as we can tell that this is a prophesied end to the kingdom. The handwriting on the wall for Belshazzar, he decided to go take um, the temple instruments that Babylon had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. They were storing them. They actually had reverence for these because they were this god of Daniel's temple instruments. So they were very respectful of them right up until Belshazzar, and he decided that he was going to have a party with them, and that didn't go over well. And there was a mysterious hand that wrote up on the wall. Nobody could interpret it. Probably ancient Hebrew. Daniel comes in. They call him. Now, at this point, Daniel had retired from service, but he was still around. Belshazzar hears about him, calls him back, and Daniel basically interprets it as being this is the end. And sure enough, that night, um, Belshazzar was killed. The the Medes, the Medes and the Persians came rolling into town, and that was the end of the Persian Empire. That was the end of the Babylonian Empire, and the starting of the Media-Persian Empire. We looked at the positioning of Darius, who was a Mede, as the first king, appointed king. He takes over, and we're almost at the end here, so I'm going to. We have the next coming up in chapter 7 is the linchpin of the whole thing. I'm going to leave you to read that over again, but make sure you do, because chapter 7 has to do with the vision of the 4 beasts, and we're going to see them again in Revelation. So pay attention to chapter 7 and the 4 beasts. Chapter 7, we also meet the Messiah coming back from here, coming back up to take his seat at God's right hand. Chapter 7 is a hugely important chapter. Make sure you read that again. After that, we get an interpretation of Daniel's vision of the ram and the goat, the Greek Empire and and the the Persian Empire. Uh, and then the 70 weeks is important. That's going to be in chapter 9. Look over that. And then chapter 10, 11, and 12 are a set of prophecy of this time of the very end to the Roman Empire. And this, like we said, these chapters read like a history book of what happened, even in this turbulent time. And you'll remember some of the things we said. This king sends his daughter over here to marry this king, and then he betrays that king, comes over here. It reads like we said, it reads like Dallas. It reads like a soap opera. That is exactly what happened during this turbulent time in the Middle East. So if you want to read Herodotus like Jeff lost his mind and did, you can see it right there in the history of this time in the Middle East. It's exactly, this is why the academics flip out with Daniel, is because he could not have written this 600 years ago. He couldn't have. How would he know? He knows because God told him. That's why. So that last set of chapters is a description of the end of the first three kingdoms, and we're now going to go into the Roman kingdom, and we're at this time in the very end of the first latter days before the Messiah comes the first time in Daniel's. So I'm going to read this last section out of chapter 12. This is when Daniel gets a vision of the end. Now, this is the end of the first latter days, the end of the second latter days, end of both. I'm thinking it's the end of both that we're seeing here mixed together. But the angels, Daniel says, well, wait, what's going to happen? And the angel says, remember, he's talking to an angel. The angel says, go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. The words there that shut up and sealed, they don't mean hide. It means right at the end of your book, say the end, and call it complete. That's what that means. The angel is telling him, complete the book, write the end, and preserve it for the time of the end when people gonna need it. And that's where we're leaving off right here as we go towards Revelation. We're going to need this book that Daniel sealed and kept for us so that we can figure out what Revelation means. All right, so that was a quick overview of Daniel. But by all means, we're going to have 2 weeks off. Go back and read it. Bring questions. When we start, we're going to start Revelation with a bunch of questions that you might have picked up. But we'll start with chapter 1 in Revelation in a couple of weeks, second week in December. I don't remember the exact date, but mark it on your calendars. Like I said, I'll be sending these reminders out each week just to keep us informed. But do we have, after that whirlwind, do we have any questions that you've got as we, like the angel says, go? Any questions at the end?
Is it pre-rapture? Is it on?
Me?
Oh, hey Norm, I got one for you.
Yeah.
What's your thought on the rapture being pre, during, or after tribulation?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that. Anthony asked that to me last night. He says, "You're going to start Revelation in December, right?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "All right. So, are you pre, post, or a millennial?" And I said, "Tell you the truth, Anthony, I actually was a preterist long years ago, that's a weird set there, and I ended up there because I was trying to find something that made sense, and it makes sense most of the time. Uh, but to be honest, I don't really have a belief at this point. I'm not going to try and fit one of those models on top of Revelation. I'm going to go into it. Now, some of you might believe in one or the other, and that's fine. That's fine, but I'm going to go into Revelation with a open mind. I'm going to do my best not to I I I think I was a premillennial for a while, but don't tell anybody. Um, the I'm going to go into it with as open a mind as I can because I want to do Tom, like Tom Bradford does, and like Michael Heiser, who are two of my go-to guys. They read the book for what it was written. So I'm going to try and go in. I'm not going to do one or the other. So I gave you a non-answer.
Yeah, that's fair enough still.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm not going to try and convince you of one or the other. We will see where it leads us. We'll see where it leads us. We're right at the end of the time, so it's going to blip out here in a minute.
Happy
Everybody
Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Happy Thanksgiving, guys. Have a great one. Be
Everybody.
safe.
Have a good vacation.
Enjoy yourself, Norm.
Have a
I
good
will.
vacation.
I
Bye.
will. Thank you
Bye.
guys.
Good, everybody.